Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm David Pasquale with the Gibbons Law Firm. First of all, I just want to tell you how we got here today. We had the pleasure of presenting at the NJAC conference, and we, I think, presented to a breakout crowd of 40 to 50 people, because the rooms can only fit 40 or 50 people. And John Donadio was nice enough to invite us to this much larger conference to talk about something that's contemporary and something that's just kind of occurred and that I think you'll be interested in knowing more about. It's no secret that weather patterns have changed throughout the world, really, but certainly in the state of New Jersey. 2018 was the wettest year on record for New Jersey, and this past decade was the wettest decade for the state since the statistics have been kept. The trend line points in the direction of a more active wet weather pattern going into the future with increasing amounts of torrential downpours and large volumes of rainfall. So where does all the water go? Much of it rolls over something that was mentioned, impervious cover, and that's a fancy word for ground cover where the water can't penetrate into the ground. It's concrete, it's macadam, it's any other surface where the water can't be absorbed by the earth, back into the earth. So where we built and developed properties have prevented rainfall from getting absorbed into the ground. The water picks up and carries whatever pollutants and carcinogens are on the ground and conveys them through an aging and, in many instances, poorly maintained stormwater management system, if we're lucky. Otherwise, the rainfall doesn't stay in the system at all, but overflows into our communities and across municipal and county borders. It causes flooding, which can be devastating to properties, and it even combines with our wastewater in 24 communities with combined sewer overflows. That's where the sanitary sewer and the stormwater sewer are combined. This tainted water gets into our lakes, streams, and estuaries, and ultimately into our drinking water. A perfect example of this, of what's happened recently, was the closure, if you read about Lake Pacon, over this past summer. The lake was closed for recreational purposes, for the most part, because of algae blooms and bacteria that got into the water. That was caused, the DEP believes, mostly because of runoff water from lawns that contain phosphates. Phosphates are what is generally contained in fertilizers, so when you're fertilizing the lawn, you're putting phosphates in there and then they're running off and causing algae blooms. Can make you sick, so they had to close multiple lakes in the state of New Jersey as a result of that. So, 60% of the state's water pollution is attributable to stormwater or non-point sources of pollution. Despite the profound consequences of this problem, there's been no dedicated source of funding to address the flooding and pollution caused by stormwater runoff until now. Our state revolving fund, you may know about. Our state revolving fund is now known as the I-Bank. In fact, I think they have a booth that's set up outside here. The I-Bank is an extraordinary resource, and it provides money in two different areas. One is for generally wastewater, and that's called the Clean Water Fund. And the other fund is really a drinking water fund, and it's really the water that we drink. And that's generally loans that are provided, so you have to borrow from the I-Bank. They do have principal forgiveness, but they're not dedicated to stormwater. Either of those funds are not dedicated to ameliorating stormwater runoff. This new statute is dedicated to that. So this statute really creates a stormwater utility, or allows the creation of a stormwater utility. It's completely voluntary. It can be established in many different ways. The legislation is flexible insofar as it allows municipalities or counties to establish a new department, or in a current department that handles stormwater management, or they can utilize the municipal utilities authorities, county utilities authorities, municipal sewage authorities, county sewage authorities, and the county itself can also establish a department within it. Generally, counties develop stormwater management plans. This is kind of an adjunct and goes beyond the stormwater management plan. I want to just get into a little bit of what the bill does in a little bit more detail before I invite up Sonia McKean, who's the author of the bill. So the bill was signed into law on March 18th of this year by Governor Murphy. The effective date of the bill, actually most of the bill, just became effective on September 14th. So we have a bill that's gone live already. What the stormwater utility does, to break it down, is the following. This is language I'm quoting from the statute itself. It allows any established stormwater utility, as it's required to be established under the law, to be based on a fair and equitable approximation of the proportionate contribution of stormwater runoff from any real property. So what does that mean? I mean, Tony will get into that later. It's essentially allowing you to establish a stormwater utility and charge a fee, and the fee has to be reasonable and based on how much pervious versus impervious cover there is, meaning how much cover rainwater can penetrate into the ground and how much cover on a given property where rainwater can't penetrate into the ground and is running off. And as I said, Tony will explain exactly what that means. I will tell you that New Jersey is a little bit late to the game in this regard. 40 states in the District of Columbia all have laws on the books that allow stormwater utilities to be established. There are close to 1,700 stormwater utilities in the United States. Part of the reason why Kathy and Tony are here is because Arcadis has a lot of experience as an international firm, a national firm, outside of New Jersey establishing stormwater utilities. So I mentioned to you how they're created, and the fees that can be charged have to be fair and equitable. That's really not defined in the bill itself, but it's taken on meaning based on how other states have interpreted it. And Tony will talk about there's primarily two ways in which a fee can be determined and imposed on both commercial property owners and residential property owners. Again, this, as we all know, I'm not going to beat around the bush, this has been referred to as the rain tax, mostly by Republicans, and the vote on this bill was generally a partisan vote, with probably a few exceptions in the Senate. Senator Bateman was a prime sponsor of the bill. The notion that New Jersey doesn't have enough money to pay for these things, and the fact that to pay for stormwater runoff, and the fact that this is completely voluntary, I think a rain tax is a misnomer in that it's not a broad-based tax that is imposed automatically. These are decisions. We're a home state in New Jersey. These are decisions that are going to get made on the local level, whether they determine to establish these or not. Part of the benefit of establishing a stormwater utility, I will tell you, is you're able to transfer a lot of the costs for your stormwater management plan from wherever those costs are being paid for right now into the stormwater utility that's established under the law. So there are credits that are allowed in the bill. Some of the credits, for example, you can get a partial fee reduction in the form of a credit if you maintain a stormwater management system on the property itself. So if you're a large enough property and have a stormwater management system, you'll get a credit there. You can also get a partial fee reduction if you install the current stormwater best management practices on your property. There's a green infrastructure credit as well. That's if you install things like rain gardens, cisterns, green roofs, or permeable pavement. Permeable pavement exists, believe it or not. And there's actually one exemption, and the exemption is for any property that qualifies for farmland assessment. As is often the case in New Jersey law, the state is going to take a little vig from you. It's going to take about 5% of the fees collected, or $50,000, whichever is less. But that's going to be utilized to set up a clean stormwater and flood reduction fund itself to pay for the management of the program, essentially through the DEP. With a few exceptions, fees that are generated have to be used to pay for the cost of projects that are directly related to stormwater runoff. Seems obvious. I would also note too, because this is the GFOA, which is really important for you, is that if you've put a plan together, established a stormwater utility, you have excess money in the fund in any given year, you're able to transfer up to 5% the excess funds into the general fund to go towards paying down general budget concerns. So that's built right into the law itself. What the money can be spent on, we'll get more into this later, but it's obviously the creation or the administrative costs of establishing a stormwater utility, capital expenditures. These are all planning, design, engineering, acquisition, construction, and improvement of your stormwater management system. O&M are a few of them, and as I mentioned before, that you can transfer costs that you're incurring now for stormwater control ordinances and unit chip fees permit. If you have anyone has background with regard to the DEP permit that's required. So the DEP is actually in the process of developing a guidance manual. It'll help communities, counties, municipalities, regional authorities that want to establish these. It has up to 18 months to do this from the enactment of the bill, so I think it's probably going to get it done a lot sooner than that. And Tony might mention too that there's another conference that's coming up that's going to contain officials from the Murphy administration and other experts that's going to talk about this. That likely some of your local government units that you work for are going to be invited to. So just a couple things I wanted to mention about the financing of this. You can decide to float bonds. You have to comply with the local bond law in order to support projects, meaning you're not going to have fees generated right away under the bill, but you're going to want to move forward with projects. You're able to bond, and you're also able to seek loans, to provide loan guarantees, to seek grants and other incentives that might be available to you. The local public contract law is applicable with regard to any projects where you're engaging folks that are external vendors to support your stormwater management plan. And importantly, the prevailing wage rate must be paid if you're seeking financial assistance, and financial assistance is defined under the bill as bonding. So if the municipality is bonding and providing bonds to municipal utilities authority or municipal sewage authority, that might be considered financial assistance that would require you to pay prevailing wage. So, and I don't know if there's anyone from Hudson County here in the audience, but there's a special Hudson County provision in the bill, which you love. Generally, the 2% cap is not applicable to stormwater utility costs in this instance, so many of you will appreciate that. The only exception is Hudson County, where a senator that represents Hudson County was able to get an amendment into the bill, and he was really concerned about costs not being included in the 2% cap and potentially ballooning as a result of implementing one of these things. So I've said a lot. I really want to give the author of the legislation a chance to talk about why he decided to do this. Without further ado, the chair of the Assembly Insurance and Public Institutions, or Financial Institutions Committee, and a friend, John McKean.
Dave, thank you very much. Like most terrific attorneys, there is a thing that he left out, and I have not very much to say to you all whatsoever. And I should have been used to that from the last seminar, right through all the facts and figures. But let me just try to talk a little bit from 30,000 feet, because it's the why. Why is this important? And in looking at our entire globe, and as we've all learned, hopefully in the last dozen years or so, we're kind of all in this together. Earth is a small place. 74% of it is made up of water. Yet, only 1% is potable. So keep that in mind and think about world population. From the time that man or woman stood erect, all through history, up to when Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, there was then 1 billion people on this earth. Between Jefferson and Obama, I just can't use Trump in the same name as Jefferson, sorry. 6 billion people on Earth. So combine that 1% potable water with 6 billion people on this planet with that time frame, knowing that population is just going to continue to increase. And water is the most precious asset that there could ever be. Now, being a little parochial about it, there are so many joys and vicissitudes in being here in New Jersey. Fancy word for a lot of challenges that are inherent to who we are. But the one advantage that this great state has is an accessible and affordable clean water source. We hopefully made sure of that 20 years ago, or give or take, with respect to the Highlands legislation, where we took the source of more than 50% of that water to the 9 million people that live in this state, and we protected it. Rutgers University back then said, as we were developing at 5,000 acres a clip each year, that by the year that it was 2040, which is only 20 years from now, it would have cost just $40 billion alone just to provide potable water to the people of this state. Putting that in perspective, that's about the size of our entire state budget. So we have something that's incredibly valuable, so long as we don't blow it. And a component of not blowing it is doing the responsible thing as it relates to this non-point source pollution. Now, I'll try to dumb it down, just like the people that talk about this try to dumb down the it's a rain tax. And I'll digress for a minute, because rain is something you could drink, you could swim, or bathe in. What is being, so to speak, taxed is to avoid what is a toxic soup that would sicken any human being or animal, for that matter, and or bring phallic to you, should you get in this way. So, as it relates to what that all is with non-point source pollution, it's kind of easy. Think about fertilizer. Now, we have the strongest fertilizer laws in the country, something that we did to try to help with Barney Bay and this crazy thing called eutrophication that was going on there. But it's still used and gets into our watersheds. And you could say, where do I live? I don't live on a watershed. We all do. They say in politics, follow the money, or in business, follow the water. Because we all live in watersheds. Groundwater then goes to streams and then all flows by gravity to larger repositories where ultimately we draw our water from. So we all live there. Road salt is easy. The poor governor, when that storm in the middle of November was such that, God forbid, if there was even a thought of a flurry, there would just be road salt everywhere. That gets put into our system. Animal waste, insecticides, lead. You guys remember how they would balance tires with those little lead balls? It comes kicking off tires when you hit one of the potholes or whatever you do. Just naturally, it gets into the stormwater system, and that's also a component of this toxic soup that just needs to be avoided. David touched on it, but we all know that it's continued to be. It's not just an anomaly. We know that the climate's getting warmer, and specifically in New Jersey, 10 years in a row, it's been the hottest year on record. 10 years in a row, it's been the wettest year on record. So between the heat combined with the volume, plus with our expanded population, we need to do something with stormwater no different than we do it with wastewater. And that's what really this legislation is all about. My friends at Greenwood Lake, if you're familiar with that area, my friends at Lake Capcom, work very much in a bipartisan way to get some extra funding to do some dredging and other components of trying to help them. But the state can't be the answer to all. I hate to say this is a $3 billion problem as it relates to the type of infrastructure that needs to be put into place. Now, like any good, in my view, someone that cares about the environment, it should always be argued from an economic perspective. I talked to you before about Rutgers projected what it would cost the state, basically doubling our whole state budget if we didn't do something about protecting the source of that water. Deposit Barnegat Bay alone, the number, I believe Barnegat Bay brings in about $3 billion a year in revenues derived out of Barnegat Bay. Yet there's 2,000 failing storm basins. Now, anybody's from Ocean County, with respect, we've had these discussions. They've spent some money on doing these things. That doesn't mean that there isn't 2,000 again, the systems as they are now in place for those engineers just can't take the volume that continues to increase as it relates to already weather patterns. New Jersey Shore Beach is outside of Barnegat Bay. Think of beyond all of our pleasure, think of the wealth that's derived from all of that. Yet, in this particular summer alone, it's the worst flare-up in fecal bacteria in over 13 years. It's not a good thing as it relates to the future and what that means for our tourism dollars. I mean, just think of from a health perspective, combined sewer overflow, which is more a North Jersey problem, 23 billion gallons of sewage mixing with the water because the system can't take it, ends up in the Hudson, the Hackensack, Passaic, Raritan, and Elizabeth rivers. So hopefully I'm preaching to the choir, understanding that something needs to be done. The state is in a position to pay for it. The state, therefore, isn't mandating this to be the case. Rather, it gives all of you leaders, whether you be a region around Lake Hakon, again, from an economic perspective, it devastated the businesses there as well as the property values. The investment meant a lot. It needs to occur. Or whether you're a county, whether you're already part of a regional sewerage group, whatever it might be, it gives you a right as leaders to join with other leaders to understand that we can take advantage of the ability to raise dollars and ultimately to be paid by the persons who produce the runoff in the form of property owners to make certain that there's an adequate system in place. Now, there's some folks that are going to talk a little bit that have forgotten what I know about the science of that, how it's funded and how you get it done. But you now have that authority. I tell young people, and just a couple things. One, New Jersey Builders Association, NIOP, they signed on to this legislation. We work with them. Businesses in Clay that do the responsible thing won't be hurt in a significant way. As it relates to homeowners, who are not going to be charged a lot just by virtue of most of them just have a driveway. They'll have alternatives to do things like rain gardens and other manners within which not to have to pay the fee. But ultimately, the idea of the fee is the most expensive one, by the way. As you said, Dave, New Jersey is one of 9 states that doesn't have this type of law in place, so we're really behind the curve in that sense. But like in Charlotte, it's about the most expensive one I know of, where the average homeowner pays $2 a month toward this particular charge. I think San Diego, it's like $1.10 a month for the summons, so you just have an idea of how and what you'd be talking about as far as individual taxpayers. And I just, we'll be leaving with this. I tell young people that want to go into public office and say, hey, if you want adulation, learn how to play the guitar. You're in the positions that you're in because you care. You're in the positions that you're in because you can make a difference. You've now been given the ability to deal with something that's a significant problem in the state that not only will impact upon quality of life, impact upon our health, but as well as will make certain that in New Jersey we're a place that will be economically viable as we preserve what's the most precious asset on earth, and that's our clean water. So with that, I'll answer any questions I have. Thank you for listening to me going on and on, and I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. We're going to have a Q&A, hopefully at least a few minutes at the end. There's a microphone in the center aisle there if anyone has questions. I'd like to introduce again Kathy Mallon, someone I've had the pleasure of working with over the last 10 years. She's been in Arcadis for 32 years. She's the vice president. She's also a proud Ford graduate. Kathy?
Good morning. Thank you all for coming, and I know we stand between, it's us and lunch, but it's a really important topic, and as Assemblyman McKean came out, that this is an option, creating utilities is an option to how to address some of these really important environmental issues. Why do we need this stormwater utility? Well, there's a number of issues. Aging infrastructure. The infrastructure throughout the state is older, and how the state can't afford to pay for it, and they were municipalities through the taxing program as it exists today, the funding just hasn't been in place. So it's really important as part of this legislation to get ahead of it and create a mechanism, provide alternatives for people to address that. There's increasing regulatory pressures. You heard some of the compelling and unfortunate issues of some of the pollutants that are out there and how we have to address those, and in order to meet permit, it costs money. And where is that money going to come from? At the same time, we're heavily taxed throughout the state, and you don't want to burden your ratepayers either. Flooding issues. How do we address most appropriately and most economically the flooding issues while addressing these pollutant issues? And really, as was mentioned earlier, stormwater is a utility. It's like wastewater and water, and it requires infrastructure and to implement some of those best practices and solutions to mitigate stormwater impacts. Some of the fees, I know you heard, it's a rain tax. It's not a tax. It's a fee. It avoids raising taxes as part of your municipal budgets or county budgets. You have a dedicated source of funding. Well, it's not going to go to all the other competing issues. While important, all these other issues, stormwater is also important and needs to have dedicated funding to address the issues. It allows for stable, long-term planning. If you know you're going to have fees coming in, it allows you as municipal entities to prioritize where do you get the biggest bang for your buck, and move forward in a systematic and thoughtful way. So it's not just more reactive, it's really proactive and preventative. So you know you'll be getting, and you get the most value out of it. It's an equitable allocation of costs. It's not just the house or the establishment that costs the most, that would have the most impact to stormwater. It's really what is part of that property that has the impact. It's also not tax exempt necessarily. How do you handle, they contribute also to runoff and some of your MS4 compliant issues. So you really look through this program, you study and come up with the most equitable allocation of those costs. And it also ultimately, at the end of the day, what is the goal? To really implement best management practices to address the issue. And with that, you need funding. Just interesting to note, in 2008, Western Kentucky has started monitoring where stormwater utilities have been created. In 2008, it was just really 923 or so throughout the country. Not really a huge number, relatively new, and I'm sure they face some of the same obstacles we're facing today. But and not in New Jersey, it wasn't enabling legislation, it wasn't carved out that you could create this. In 2019, it's still none in New Jersey, but the legislation is in place and it requires time. And we heard from our Assemblyman and from Mr. Pasquale that guidance, the documents are going to come out. It'll take time to implement the utilities. You don't want to just rush to do this. But there's over 1,700 stormwater utilities throughout the country. It's recognized the importance, not just in New Jersey, but throughout the country. Funding is required to mitigate the stormwater issues and really implement the best practices most cost effectively to do this. And I think the highest fee we had, I think, $0 to $540 a year. While not cheap, but if you could address some of these issues, even at that pricing structure, can make a big impact. Not governed by politics. I'm not sure why, and not to get into the politics of it, but it's not a red or blue issue. It's really governed. You can see it's really the enabling legislation who has been able to do this. And it just so there's no correlation. Western Kentucky, when they did the survey for fun, I guess, can't get, I knew you hear politics and elections and what have you. But this really is an issue that crosses all party lines, and it's really important just to do the right thing and look at your situation, what is the best practice to address the stormwater issue. And with that, there's some considerations specific to the technical issues. I'm going to turn it over to Tony Dill to talk more about some of those issues.
Thank you. So I'm based out of our Philadelphia office and have done a lot of work with stormwater utilities in Pennsylvania. If you go back a few years, maybe 10 years ago, there weren't stormwater utilities in Pennsylvania. There's some enabling legislation in 2013, 14, 15 that allowed primarily authorities that were set up in Pennsylvania to take on the role of stormwater. And since that time, you can see there's been pretty much an explosion of stormwater utilities in Pennsylvania. And I kind of put this little map together. I was curious, there's a lot of emphasis on the Chesapeake Bay watershed, pollutant reduction plans for that in Pennsylvania. So I was curious, are they all focused in that watershed? But no, we're seeing them throughout the state. And it's for the reason we've talked about aging infrastructure, flooding issues. These aren't, limited to any particular geography of any state or to any state. So we are seeing these utilities throughout Pennsylvania. The ones over here on the left, just for information, having flat residential fees. So every residential parcel in that community pays the same stormwater fee. The ones over on the right have some type of a tiered structure where bigger properties pay more than smaller properties, or based on the amount of actual impervious area. They've gone through the effort to digitize every single parcel on that property, which is not really typical. Nationwide, if you look at it, the most common structure for residential properties is still a flat fee for that community. And I'll talk a little bit about why that is in these slides. So overall, in Pennsylvania, since it has about 34 utilities in place now, and there's many more that are being evaluated in various stages of implementation this time. And if you look at the range there, the residential, single-family residential properties range from about $13 up to $185 a year, probably in the $70, $80 a year is kind of what they probably average out to. So when we look at stormwater utilities, we have to think about what is the scope that a stormwater utility should provide. We don't currently have it. And there's the administrative functions, clearly, doing your MS4, permit administration reporting. You have to feed your stormwater billings and collections. You have a credit program, which in New Jersey you're required to have one. Not all stormwater utilities do. You have to be administering the credit program, making sure that folks are getting their appropriate credits, and then any public education and outreach. And then of course we have operation, maintenance, and stormwater system. We have all the buried infrastructure, the outfall inspections that need to get done. In many cases, there's best management practices, stormwater detention basins, things like that on a private property, and those need to be inspected to make sure they're performing correctly. And then some utilities have even incorporate things like street sweeping and leaf collection that they directly impact the stormwater system and the inlets in our community, and roll that into the program for the mentioned. So at any rate, we would have to look specific to each community what best serves the needs of that community. And of course, capital projects. Our MS4 permits often have pollutant reduction plan requirements, so projects need to be built, designed and built and put in place to reduce the pollutants in our stormwater. We have flooding projects, certain communities where we have combined sewers, CSO control projects can be funded out of this as well, or even expanding the stormwater network. So I put this slide together, but I think David pretty much hit on all these things, so I'm just going to go pretty quickly. Just from my perspective, some unique features of this legislation are that every property, a credit needs to be offered to every property that has stormwater management system or BMPs on the property. It's usually not required. A lot of utilities implement credit programs. Sometimes they're just for the commercial properties, bigger bang for the buck in terms of administrative credit program. But there are some residential credit programs out there, and that's something that we required to look at in this case. I think the rest of these data are covered. So, as was mentioned, the enabling legislation requires that fees be based on a fair and equitable approximation of the proportionate contribution of stormwater runoff. So that's the key to designing the rate structure. When we look at the residential properties, as I mentioned, typically we see a flat fee, so the residential grouping that contributes stormwater runoff is divided by the number of units, and they all contribute for that, or a tier structure. there's a couple ways of doing tier structure. It's typically based just off of the size of the property, and I'll go over that in a moment. And then for the non-residential multifamily, so there's other commercial properties, it's typically based off the impervious area, and that's digitized and measured unique for every parcel in the community, so you get a customized bill. There are some communities, Philadelphia uses a combination of gross area and impervious area, since the green spaces, if you will, still can contribute some runoff, but that's not really typically how it's done. And given that we have a horticultural and agricultural use exemption here, my personal perspective is I would think it probably makes sense that we don't include those green spaces in the fee structure that we'd be looking to implement, in New Jersey. And one of the things we're always doing when we're creating these fee structures is really trying to, at the bottom here, balance precision versus simplicity. A lot of communities, we do an evaluation of tiered structures versus flat, and then we're trying to wrestle with what's going to be easy to administer, easy to explain to the community versus most fair and equitable type of fee structure we get. There's always a balance trying to find out what's right for that particular community. So for the residential properties, as I mentioned, the ones on the left would be an example where every property is residential, pays the same, easy to administer, easy to explain. Not going to get many appeals on that because there's nothing really much to argue unless you're saying I'm not a residential property. When we go to the tiered structures, there is generally a correlation between the amount of impervious area and the size of the property. It's obviously not going to be a perfect correlation, but we do see bigger properties on bigger houses, bigger driveways, things like that. So it's a little more equitable to say those with bigger properties and bigger houses paying more than those with smaller. There's some potential for appeals. We see some of our GIS databases where the county parcel layers that the actual size of the property, we measure in GIS versus what's on their deeded acreage might be a little off or something. So again, if we have a tier structure, that could potentially impact whether somebody's on one tier or not. But those are generally small and manageable appeals that we would get from this type of a residential structure. So when we look at the commercial properties or the non-residential multifamily, those are almost always based on an impervious area where we take the total program costs for the stormwater program that are developed as we implement a utility, and divide it by the impervious area for the number of ERUs, or equivalent residential units, and I'll explain what that is in just a minute. So we have the cost divided by the number of units, and that's the rate, basically, that we're charging. And, as impervious just shows what you'd expect, rooftops, driveways, things like that. So in this example here on the left, it shows for a hypothetical community, if on your average, your residential property had 1,950 square feet, when you account for the driveway, the primary residence, and any other structures on there. If that was the average for a particular community, we would call that the base unit or the equivalent residential unit. And that's used to then figure out how much do we charge the commercial properties. And in this example on the right here showing if we had 19,500 square feet for, say, this apartment building or whatever commercial property this is, that's equivalent to 10 ERUs because it's 10 times as much impervious surface. So in this community, we charge $10 a month per ERU. The resident would pay 10, and this other property would be paying $100. So we've been asked in some cases, what about combined sewer areas? Because some of our communities have MS4s, which are municipal separate storm sewers, and they have stormwater program. Then they also have a portion of the community that's combined. This is City of Lancaster, for example. So we said, well, if the people that live in the combined sewer area are already paying a wastewater fee that includes conveying the stormwater in those pipes, can I charge them a stormwater fee also? It seems like, how can we justify that? And it has been done and justified for several reasons. That the stormwater fee would be funding both your MS4 fluid production plant projects as well as CSO projects. So you can take a portion of that money and specifically use it for projects in the combined sewer. The revenue can promote community-wide efforts that include parks and other things that are throughout the entire community, not just limited to one of these sewer sheds, if you will. And then, in some cases, like Lancaster, they actually take a portion of the revenue they collect from the stormwater fee and transfer it over to the wastewater fund The enabling legislation, as was mentioned, requires credits, and credits can be things for storage, ponds that retain stormwater, infiltration practices, that rain gardens, forest pavement, as mentioned, things that encourage the stormwater to infiltrate, and then other vegetative practices that try to reduce the amount of silt and sediment runoff from properties. Certain credit programs also include things that are less for structural pest management practices, but things like education programs, fertilizer management programs, those that have within their municipal boundary, MPDS, industrial discharge permits or municipal permits recognize that they're doing on-site controls already. And some of you have left over the door for innovation. Come talk to us, we'll see what we can work out that helps improve our stormwater. We'll put some flexibility in the program. But overall, almost every credit program ever actually has an overall cap. So no matter what you can do on your property, you can't get 100% out of the stormwater figure. So maybe 50% is kind of a typical level. So some various things you might hear, sort of challenges of stormwater fees. It's a tax. It's illegal. You're not allowed to tax this if you're in authority or whatnot. And the key there is designing the fee in accordance with the enabling legislation that's based on the fair and equitable approximation of stormwater runoff. If the fee is too high, again, that's on us to communicate the benefits and value of the stormwater program, and also the availability of credit programs, so you can get a discount. Everybody likes a discount. So make sure we get that messaging out of the program. It's good to compare what other utilities in your area, in your state, would be able to regulations surrounding area and say, look, these are common, this is what it's paid elsewhere. So it kind of shows people what we're doing in line with others in the region. And then this note here, it explained that tax increases might be more significant tax value. Because stormwater fees are applied to all the entities, including the nonprofits, just like electric bills and water and sewer bills and things, it spreads those costs out over a bigger pool than just a tax increase. So that's something that sometimes resonates in certain communities. From businesses, so let's say this isn't in our budget. Now it's starting as a fee. We set our budgets once a year, how we're supposed to pay for that. And that's, again, a valid concern that we have to get the message out as early as we can. We do our public outreach. And some utilities have sort of a phased-in approach for commercial properties where they give them maybe a credit initially and giving them time to submit a credit application. If they don't, the credit goes away, or just phasing in that fee over time. And then finally, keeping your elected officials very well informed, so when they get inquiries, complaints, etc., they're aware of the program, they're aware of the benefits, and they can help us with the program. And finally, I just want to touch on, there's some considerations for region. A lot of these utilities have an implemented at the local municipal level, but there are some advantages, and many communities are looking at trying to extend their boundaries out, include multiple communities or even county-wide type programs. Pollutant reduction plans, projects can sometimes be done more efficiently rather than me building little rain gardens and things in my community to get my pollutant removals. Maybe there's a bigger project for large stream restoration that spans multiple boundaries. We could go in together and get some efficiencies and economies of scale there. Certain overhead functions, if you want to combine utility sort of management functions from a bunch of entities into a single entity, you can have some cost savings. And it can help facilitate some of the regional flood solutions. So, your stormwater is coming in my community, or yours is coming in mine, can help us manage that in a more holistic way. One of the keys is the individual municipalities are going to need to agree on what scope of services should be provided at that regional level. And that's where the real challenge can come into play. There's so many things that could be in the scope of a storm utility. You have to say, what do we want to still handle